When I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and a son of man that you care for him? Yet you invite us to open ourselves to communion with you. In accordance with your promise, your final words in the Gospel of Matthew, I am with you, always, until the end of the age.
God is with us every day. It is not only a spiritual closeness, it's a physical, concrete, real presence.
St. Thomas Aquinas says something beautiful. There is nothing greater than this sacrament in which the gift and the giver are one. All God's gifts are, by their nature, inferior to God. If we put together all the gifts we have received from God in the order of nature, in the order of grace, we would surely have an immense list, but altogether it would not be the equivalent of the giver, while nothing is greater than this sacrament, because the gift and the giver are one.
At the moment of consecration, the substance of bread becomes the body of Christ, and the substance of wine, his blood. It is the transubstantiation, the passage of substance.
It is not actually the gift of a thing. The Eucharist is not a thing, it is a person. The Eucharist is not a relic, it is a presence continually real. Jesus gives us his body.
God is united with us in a way humans cannot imagine, such a great way that some have doubted at times. In the face of incredulity, scientifically inexplicable things have often occurred. One of these signs, these miracles, one of the most ancient, occurred in Italy, at Lanciano to be precise.
Between 720 and 750, so almost 1300 years ago, in the chapel of Saint Legonziano, beneath this church, there were the Basilian monks officiating here. A chronicle from 1600 tells us that these monks included in particular one who was living a period of doubt about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. One day, while he is celebrating, what happens? He sees in his hands the host, the piece of bread, turn into flesh, and in the chalice, the wine becomes blood.
The first analysis on this material was carried out in 1574, and then on other occasions until the end of the 1800s. But none of these established what the material really was until 1970, when the Bishop of Lanciano and the Provincial Superior of the Conventual Franciscans decided to carry out a detailed scientific assessment and analysis. The task was given to Professor Linoli, a noted anatomopathologist of the time, who used all the techniques available in 1971 and then again in 1981. They are the same techniques we use today. It's just that now we use technology to help us, while he had to do everything by hand. All this was then published in a journal that was quite famous at the time, Quaderni Sclavo, and became a high-level scientific publication. Professor Linoli unequivocally stressed that this is muscular tissue that can be traced back to myocardial tissue. The genetic analysis also highlighted that it is human myocardial tissue. As for the blood, that is human, type AB, which, remember, is the same blood group as the shroud, and the same group linked to other miracles that occurred, such as the Bolsena miracle. So, there is no doubt that the conserved particle is of human, in particular myocardial, tissue. The clotted blood is human clotted blood. This is clear. Science has given us the chance to say so with certainty.
Faith tells us another beautiful thing, that in our Catholic tradition, we have devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So coming here and knowing that in the Eucharist that we take, the Lord gives us His heart, there is great wonder in the fact that He comes here to give us His heart. We often see the heart of Jesus as something symbolic, but in this place, at Lanciano, Jesus comes to us to remind us that He gives us His heart. So wonder of all wonders. As a monk of ours used to say, here the heavens were torn open and God has come down among us.
Yet this miracle was not enough. Over history, many other times and in many other places, miracles have happened with the Eucharist at the center. Several years ago, all the Eucharistic miracles recognized by the Church were for the first time gathered and catalogued in an exhibition. Buenos Aires, Amsterdam, Paris, Valencia. 2,000 years of history, 2,000 years of presence. This exhibition on the Eucharistic miracles was devised by a child, Carlo Acutis, born in London, brought up in Milan, buried in Assisi.
Ever since Carlo was a young child, he showed a great interest in everything that is the church, the saints, the gospel. For example, I remember when he was very young and we were passing in front of churches, he wanted to go in and greet the crucified Jesus, the tabernacle. So going there was important to him. He'd stop for quite a long time, too. I was born in a family of lay publishers. My father was not anti-church, but he was, let's say, not practicing. The sacraments of First Communion, Confirmation, and marriage, they were the only 3 times I attended Holy Mass. I always say that Carlo was a little savior for me.
Love for Jesus and the Eucharist is so strong in Carlo, even as a child, that after careful assessment by the bishop, he is allowed to receive First Communion at just 7 years of age.
We'd go towards this rise where there's this monastery on a hill. At a certain point, we had to stop because a shepherd was passing the lamb crossing the street. And he saw that as something of a sign of predilection from the Lord, because we were taking Carlo for his First Communion. He constantly felt this living presence of Jesus, which then animated him to introduce Jesus, the love of Jesus, to many other people. For example, we have our housekeeper, Rajesh, who comes from a priestly Brahmin caste. He was really struck by Carlo's truthful, persuasive example.
I'm Rajesh and I come from Mauritius. I started working with the Acutis family, with Carlo. At that time he was very young, he was full of affection. After nursery, he started school here at the Marceline Sisters. I'd sometimes bring him and then he asked if I could take him into the church to have a little sort of meditation by the tabernacle. Now, I didn't know anything. I'd wonder what's going on. I could understand if he were an adult. Then he told me what's inside the body of Jesus, present in blood, soul and flesh. I said, but Carlo, how is it possible? And he would then slowly explain to me during the time I took him to school. Every day he told me the same thing. I wasn't a Christian. I come from a Hindu, a Brahmin family. And my father was a so-called Pandit, and a kind of priest. He had knowledge of the language of Sanskrit. It's very rare, almost impossible for a Brahmin to convert. The teaching I had from Carlo, more than my father, I can say he was my spiritual master. All the actions he made struck me right in the heart. Then he said to me, the Lord lives in the heart too. Then as he started to grow up, I felt when he went to Mass and took communion, he didn't force me. Carlo explained all the importance of the Eucharist to me, how it makes people live. Because this world is full of temptation. He explained it can come in forms of clothes, sex, alcohol, TV. He said this is how the devil enters your life. And you can't face the situation alone. And so, when he started to explain to me the Word of God, the Bible, he did so with sweetness. It was as if we'd already gone up to heaven. And he told me what heaven is like, how you live, even how you live with the Lord. It was as if I'd already arrived. I was happy. Then I also had dreams about Jesus, and the Lord, and the Virgin Mary. Then I started to tell Carlo about it. I asked him, how can I have these dreams? He told me, Jesus loves you, Rajesh. Then I had myself baptized. It was 1999.
Carlo really liked Assisi, and the question many ask is, why? But you see, it's not so much the city as the man inhabiting this city, and it's Francis. Because the man of peace, the man who loves and respects creation, the man of the poor, they are the three great thirsts that youths carry within themselves. And Assisi is also loved because of its cultural value. Ultimately, the first color film kept here in this basilica was made to meet people. Because let's not forget, that story was frescoed to reach the hearts of simple people who could neither read nor write.
Mi ricordo benissimo quando Carlo è arrivato.
I clearly remember when Carlo arrived with all the family. They'd bought this house near mine. We didn't know his was a well-to-do family. But he had unique simplicity. And this child, who spoke many languages, and I didn't know, I tutored him for school with the other children. Me, just imagine. I think he was pretending when he let my grandchildren answer. Pretending not to know the answers.
I met Carlo when I was 6 years old. From that moment on, we were inseparable and spent all our summers and holidays together. He was very pleased to spend as much time as possible at Assisi, and this went on until his death in 2006, when I was 14. To show who Carlo was, we were 10, 11 years old. We'd gone for an ice cream on a very hot day. Returning home, Carlo counted the change and realized we'd been given 20 cents more. He absolutely wanted to go back and give the extra money back because it was the fruit of these people's work and sacrifice. It was wrong that we appropriated it, so he made us go through Assisi again, which is, if you know it, all uphill, to give the sum back.
I was 7 or 8 years younger. I was a child and they were already almost youths of 13, 14. Sometimes my cousins wanted to exclude me from their games in the various activities you do as children, while Carlo always opposed that kind of thing.
After a certain time, he'd go back home because he had to go and pray. No one at that age, right? That alone made me think.
This youth struck our community too, because I remember in the period when he came to Assisi, some friars said to me, "Enzo, do you know Carlo? He spends a lot of time in Eucharistic adoration." I was so about it, but no, he stunned me too, because to then discover that he used to say, people who put themselves before the sun get tanned, people who place themselves before the Eucharist become saints, well, extraordinary.
And us, living here in the center of Milan, there are often homeless people on the streets, sleeping in cardboard boxes. So he used his own money and gave people sleeping bags instead of buying toys for himself.
They'd often stop. I don't know them, the vagabonds, especially in the little church here in front. And he brought them food or blankets if they were needed. That's how he was.
There was a man called Matteo. He was sleeping on the ground on cardboard and was cold. Carlo started to worry. He wouldn't sleep and he thought what he could do for the man, let's say the right word, tramp. Carlo was offended. No, Rajesh, you mustn't say tramp because they are all creatures of the Lord. Then he returned home and forced his mum, "Mum, why don't you give him a sleeping bag so he can sleep well?" And he had cooking done for him too. Every evening I accompanied Carlo. He didn't bring him leftovers from our home to eat, but fresh, just cooked food, just like we were eating. Not like if it's leftover, we'll take it to him. He didn't like that. He said, this man in difficulty should eat like we do too. And that's what his life was like.
It was as if I saw St. Francis in him.
Carlo could experience hands-on what are, unfortunately, the contradictions that currently exist in the church. That is where, for example, youths might attend catechism class and receive confirmation, but then no longer go to Mass. So he came to have this wish to present a little more historically what were episodes, miracles, mainly prodigies, signs, that the Lord has wished to give us over the centuries, where he really wanted to show that in the consecrated bread and wine, there truly, actually is his genuine live presence. Carlo used to say that we are far luckier than those living 2,000 years ago near Jesus, because those living in Jesus' times were often hindered from seeing him because of space and time. It was not easy to approach Jesus because he was surrounded by crowds. Well, we just have to go down to the closest church outside our home, and we have Jerusalem outside our house. Carlo was amazed how today you can stand in line for kilometers to go and see a rock singer or an actor or a football match, and then there are no such lines before the tabernacle. Carlo said that living this very Eucharistic dimension already places you in co-eternity. That is, you already enter the dimension of God's time, kairos, as theologians call it. That is, this time of God, this time where you are in a certain sense already in the Trinitarian dimension. And Carlo was in fact aware that the Eucharist, if taken in good faith of course, transforms you. Every time you receive the Eucharist, Carlo said, every time you take communion, you're no longer the same person because Jesus works transformations inside you. So even if you don't realize it, he increasingly tries to transform you and make you become like him.
For Carlo, the Eucharistic Miracles exhibition isn't just a pastime, and it's more than a youthful passion. It's a heartfelt mission of evangelization. It's actually something for which Carlo studies in university books and texts in English that he buys himself so as to master the tools of the web.
Every time I went to clean Carlo's room, he was there with his computer. He was researching. There were pages about, he was writing. I said to him, "Oh, Carlo, what are you doing? It's a lot of work. You should rest." He replied, "Not now. I don't have time to rest. As well as school lessons, I worry about the world." He made the exhibition panels. He did all the research. He said, if we present how Jesus is present in the Eucharist, they will know Jesus. They have to see what happened, the tale, all the miracles, then the Lord truly comes. Otherwise, people are lost. This is my work, my duty.
Bear in mind that there wasn't all this internet everywhere when he started this exhibition. And he involved us too. We had to make journeys to take the photos, which he considered very important because people need to see signs, see photos, see paintings. A lot of people became promoters of this exhibition, so we really could touch all the world. And many people bore witness to us that they came closer to God and discovered the importance of the Eucharist. Carlo had understood this great mystery and tried to communicate it to others. He tried to make people understand it. Because, of course, what is the greatest love one can have for others? It is wishing for their eternal salvation, that's it, as well as the earthly help one can give. But laymen give it too, non-believers give it too. But mainly, it is helping them reach what is eternal bliss.
During my first years of teaching, Carlo was actually one of my students. And to tell you the truth, I'm very honored about this at this point of history. The nicest thing, really, is how Carlo related to his companions, to his classmates. And he had some good friendships with girls. And that's exactly how it should be in the second year of high school. I had been teaching bioethics, and therefore I had involved my students on the meaning and the value of life. When the topic of abortion came up, whether it was right or wrong, I remember him right there at the end of the room. He had very clear ideas about this because there was the disquisition, from what point can we talk of human life? And so on. And with almost disarming naturalness and simplicity, he said, it's clear that it's from the moment in which it was conceived, from when the egg cell and the sperm meet.
This is the generation which unfortunately lives these means of communication explosively. But it's also the generation that mostly suffers because of the demonic attacks these means of communication can bring. For example, pornography, the use of drugs, which is so widespread and cheap, or bullying, which generates extreme situations like suicides. With a click, you can practically enter hell, and no one protects these children. So Carlo can teach us because he's experienced all these dangers, but has managed to dominate these means of communication. That is, he has learned to be master of and not subject to these means.
Carlo was a driving force in the class. He invited all his classmates to stop at the canteen, to eat together, and then, right on the school grounds, to shoot a video for the contest, you'll be the volunteer.
No, lei guardi nella videocamera. 3, 2, 1, via.
In Christus Vivit, the final document of the Synod on Young People, Pope Francis wished to dedicate a chapter to Carlo, in which he practically presents Carlo to all the youths worldwide as a model due to the way he used means of communication.
Around April, May, when we were taking stock of the volunteer activities, he himself became available, saying, "During the summer, I'll work on a website for the school to put forward for the volunteer activity." And he did so. He worked on these things. We thought of presenting his work on the 4th of October 2006, but unfortunately those were the very days when he fell ill.
After he died, I found a video on his computer in which, 2 months before dying, he says, "When I'll weigh 70 kilos, I'm predestined to die." He was struck by leukemia M3, the most devastating, the fulminating one. In 3 days, he was practically gone. He lived through his illness serenely because shortly before dying, Carlo said, "I die serene because I have not wasted even a minute of my life in things God does not like." At the funeral, I noted the presence of many immigrants, many people coming from afar, so people who could be Muslims, Hindu, Buddhist, even some with a Sikh turban. He worked the first miracles on the day of the funeral, where there were so many people who asked him for help, because he already enjoyed this reputation. The church was so full that many had to remain outside. It seemed more like a party than a funeral, but yes, I think it was a party because Carlo ended up in heaven immediately, as he asked the Lord. "I offer my suffering for the Pope and the Church because I don't want to go to purgatory, but go straight to heaven."
After his death, I felt his closeness on many occasions. For example, before every university exam, even subconsciously, Carlo came to mind. I never failed an exam at university, so I don't know if it's my ability or his nearness. I'd like to think it's a combination of the two things.
He managed to give hope to various people I knew who had problems.
You know, when something gets to me or I feel down, especially during the pandemic, the one we had before, I always say, "What'll we do now, Carlo? Help me, eh?" And he has always helped me.
After Carlo's death, I don't feel I am alone. He always said to me, "Life is short here. If you're a good person, if you lead a good life, you'll always live in eternity in heaven." And I always kept that in my mind. But really, life can change afterwards. That's how it is.
When there is talk of heroic virtues in the servants of God, there, the word may be misunderstood because ultimately it's a word that comes from the Greek world. The Greek hero, the Roman hero, was the one who found the principle of his excellence within himself. The saints, the servants of God, did not find the principle of their excellence in themselves. When I was a boy, many years ago now, I thought that Christian life really consisted of being increasingly stronger, more heroic, better, and, so to speak, the clash with reality depressed me greatly. Well, I later discovered that there's no need to think that Christian life consists of always offering God only good things, as long as you have only good things and no more ambiguity or contradictions. Christian life is offering to God oneself, even the most ambiguous, contradictory things, even the shadows inside us. And I thought I understood this alone, but I actually found it in a homily by St. Basil the Great, who says just this, and I want to hand it on to you because it was also Carlo's secret. A saint is not one who offers God good things. a saint is one who offers Christ oneself, which is far more than good things. After all, it is the experience of St. Paul, to whom Jesus said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness."
In 2013, the miracle taken into consideration for the cause of beatification occurred in Brazil.
A miracle is called for because we say that it is the sign of God for the cause underway, both for beatification and canonization. So it is God who confirms, yes. And this happened in Brazil to a child, a small child, who was suffering terribly from a malformation of the pancreas. This caused continued infections, vomiting, and poor digestion, and he was often hospitalized. His family, his parents were desperate. A priest, a friend of the family who had heard of Carlo, suggested praying to God for intercession through Carlo. And so they did. They invented a novena and, some time later, the great surprise, the wonder for everyone. The child's pancreas was in perfect health. It took 2 years for the Vatican's medical team to prove that it really was a miracle. That is, could not be explained by medical science. And so Carlo became blessed, also due to this miracle occurring in Brazil, where Carlo Acutis is so loved. When he became venerable, our bishop asked the family for the possibility of moving him to one of the churches in Assisi. The family made a great gesture because it gave Carlo's body to the diocese, so this was another gesture of spoliation. It now belongs to the Universal Church, to the Diocese of Assisi. Our bishop chose the sanctuary of the spoliation because he found many points in common, points of contact. For example, Carlo loved to say, "Not me, but God." And this is rather a perfect translation of what true spoliation is. Spoliation of the ego, the self, to let God reign.